This has been one of the wildest free agencies I have ever seen. Multiple NFL superstars are going to teams you would have never imagined, and well, that means the league landscape is changing drastically. At the end of the day, some teams took advantage of this while others got completely obliterated within the mayhem. So in this video, we're going to grade each and every team's free agency, starting with the Pittsburgh Steelers, who get an A+. Getting Russell Wilson for the veteran minimum was a great move, but getting Justin Fields for a bag of chips, that's amazing given the fact that he gets a full year to learn under a Hall of Famer. Patrick Quinn is also a great addition to this team, and they didn't lose a lot of players, so this is a dream free agency for Pittsburgh. Now for the Commanders, B-. They are using a lot of their cap space in very talented players like Austin Eckler and Bobby Wagner, however they are quickly declining, so this isn't particularly good. Besides, they did lose a few solid players like Logan Thomas, for example, so I wouldn't say this has been the best offseason for the Commanders. On to the Chiefs, B+. Signing Hollywood Brown is a great move to give Mahomes some more help, and all while letting MVS and Mecole Hardman leave. They didn't sign a lot of players, but in addition to all that, keeping Chris Jones was a key move to make, and hey, they made it. Moving on, the Panthers get a C-. The trade for Deontay Johnson was honestly quite good, and the rest of their signings were honestly solid. However, losing Brian Burns, Jeremy Chin, and Dante Jackson will definitely represent a big blow to the defensive side of the ball, hence why they don't get a really good grade. Up next, the Bengals will get a B. Getting Von Bell back and signing Geno Stone are two moves I'm actually a big fan of. Zach Moss is set to replace Joe Mixon, so his departure isn't terrible, however, wide receiver is now a relatively big liability over in Cincinnati. On to the 49ers, C+. They added Devondre Campbell, which is honestly an amazing move. However, they did lose quite a handful of players. Arik Armstead is a big loss, and with Chase Young leaving, that D-line isn't nearly as scary as it was. Obviously, the Niners are still Super Bowl contenders, but free agency wasn't particularly kind to them. Now for the Houston Texans, A. Pairing Daniel Hunter with Will Anderson is possibly one of the greatest free agency decisions this organization has ever made. They got Joe Mixon to replace Devin Singletary, and well, overall, this is turning out to be a great offseason for the Texans. Moving on, the Lions get a B+. They did lose CJ Gardner-Johnson, but that's not a huge liability given the players they signed. DJ Reader is a huge addition to the defense, and so is Marcus Davenport. Outside of them, there weren't many splash signings, but Detroit did keep most of their key players, so that's a win in my books. Up next, the Denver Broncos will get an F. This is a disaster situation for them. They'll be paying millions to Russell Wilson to play for the Steelers. Jerry Jeudy is now out of the team, and so is Justin Simmons, who was easily a top 5 safety in the league. For me, this shows Denver is once again in rebuilding mode because free agency just tore them apart. Moving on to the Cardinals, C. The trade for Desmond Ridder makes absolutely no sense to me, especially since they lost a solid wideout. They did sign some solid players, but losing Hollywood Brown and DJ Humphries is something that I cannot ignore. Now for the Dolphins, C+. They inevitably lost Christian Wilkins, but add Emmanuel Ogba, Xavier Howard, now that's painful. They signed a couple of players like Jordan Poyer to try and keep up, but honestly, I think they lost considerably more talent than what they gained in free agency. On to the Philadelphia Eagles, B+. I honestly don't understand the Kenny Pickett trade, but hey, whatever. Going from DeAndre Swift to Saquon Barkley is much more of an improvement than most people realize, and getting CJ Gardner-Johnson back as well as Devin White are two exceptional moves. Honestly, this was quite a solid free agency for this team. Moving on, the Patriots get a C. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they did nothing relevant. I like the move of getting Jacoby Brissett to maybe mentor a rookie quarterback, but outside of that, they lost way more talent than they gained, and I mean way more. Now for the Bears, B+. They were on their way to have probably the best free agency out there. Pairing Keenan Allen with DJ Moore and adding some pretty explosive players such as DeAndre Swift and Kevin Byard was amazing. However, trading Justin Fields for a half-eaten bag of chips is not it. Even though I massively respect Ryan Poles' decision of sending him somewhere he'll have the chance to be successful. On to the Jacksonville Jaguars, A-. Losing Calvin Ridley isn't as big of an issue as it may sound, especially when you see the players they added. Arik Armstead is an absolute unit, and Gabe Davis was quite an underrated signing. And well, getting Mac Jones for a 6th rounder, honestly a good move since he's a pretty cheap backup who has some starter experience. Moving on, the Browns get a B-. Getting Jerry Jeudy was honestly quite a good move, especially when you see what they gave up for him. They did lose a few players, and despite not getting pretty much anyone in free agency, they still retained most of their important players such as Adarius Smith, so it wasn't a terrible free agency. Now for the Rams, C+. They filled the roster with a a handful of underrated signings outside of maybe Jimmy Garoppolo. They lost a few players, but nobody important other than Aaron Donald, who just retired. And actually, that's easily the main reason why the grade is so low. Not because they didn't make good moves, but because losing a Hall of Famer is always incredibly painful for a team. Up next, the Titans get a B. Getting Calvin Ridley is huge, but wholly overpaid. He's not worth that much money. Losing Henry was definitely a big blow, but honestly, I think Tony Pollard will be just fine, so I think this is quite an average of season for the Titans. Moving on to the Saints, C+. Willie Gay was the only meaningful player they signed up until Monday, so they weren't doing anything at all. However, getting Chase Young to a one-year deal is actually quite a good move, but looking past that bright spot, losing Marcus May and Michael Thomas is slightly worse, hence the grade. On to the Seahawks, B-. They lost a lot of players, starting with both Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, who were honestly quite the duet at safety. They got Tyrell Dodson, which is honestly good, and I actually quite like the trade for Sam Howell, who can sit behind Geno Smith for a while, and hey, maybe he learns a thing or two and becomes the team's starting quarterback once Geno leaves. The New York Jets then get a C+. Getting Tyron Smith was a great move, and one that massively improves a previously terrible offensive line. However, outside of him, they didn't sign anyone important, outside of probably Mike Williams, and they lost quite a few solid and average players. Not terrible for the Jets, but I wouldn't say a dream free agency either. On to the Buccaneers, B. They didn't really make any splash moves, and they lost some good players like Devin White, for example. However, resigning Baker Mayfield seems like a good move, but keeping Mike Evans, now that's a great move, solidifying what seems to be so far a pretty good offseason for Tampa. Moving on to the Ravens, B. Yeah, they got Derrick Henry, so now their offense will probably break multiple rushing records in 2025. But hear me out, they also lost a lot of good players such as Patrick Quinn, OBJ, Geno Stone, so although this was a solid free agency for Baltimore, I wouldn't say it was great. Now for the Chargers, C-. They got Gus Edwards. Yeah, that's about it. On the other hand, they did lose Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and Austin Eckler, which means Justin Herbert is now in a terrible situation. I don't know, this just feels like a terrible free agency for me, even though there wasn't much the Chargers could do with how little cap space they had. Up next, the Buffalo Bills get a D. Curtis Samuel and Matt Collins aren't terrible signings, unlike Mitch Trubisky. But what really hurt the Bills were the departures. Gabe Davis, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, all gone. But hey, it was pretty much the only option they had, so it is what it is. On to the Falcons, A-. Kirk Cousins was a top 5 quarterback when healthy last season, so getting him is a good move regardless of the price. Darnell Mooney is a great addition to pair alongside Drake London, and the Falcons didn't lose a lot of players, so I would say this was a pretty good free agency for them. Now for the Cowboys, D. Free agency started very late for them, so of course they get a bad grade. The only important signing they made is Eric Kendricks, but considering the amount of starters they lost, I wouldn't say things are going pretty well in Dallas. Moving on to the Colts, B-. I feel like they haven't done anything splashy, but they're doing just fine. They replaced Gardner Minshew with Joe Flacco, which is okay I guess, but the main thing with Indy is that they didn't lose anyone important, and that's huge. New deal for Michael Pittman? Yes please. On to the Vikings, C+. Losing your franchise quarterback, no matter how old he is, will always be painful. In addition to that, they lost other good players like Daniel Hunter, and despite getting guys like Aaron Jones, I feel like overall this was a downgrade over in Minnesota. Now for the Giants, B. Brian Burns will now boost this defensive line to be one of the best ones across the league. However, you cannot ignore the players lost in free agency. Saquon Barkley will definitely be missed, as well as Xavier McKinney. So I would say this was a good but not amazing free agency for New York. Moving on, the Raiders get a B. Getting Christian Wilkins to play alongside Max Crosby is an amazing move in my opinion, and so is signing Gardner Minshew to maybe even be their starter next season. However, they did lose some important players like Josh Jacobs, so that's why they don't have a higher grade. Up next, the Packers get an A-. Getting Xavier McKinney is an amazing move, yet people don't seem to realize it. In addition to that, the Packers pretty much swapped Aaron Jones for Josh Jacobs, which is arguably an improvement. And when it comes to departures, Devontae Campbell is pretty much the only one relevant, so that's a good free agency for Green Bay. Anyways, that's all for today's video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.